Of the great libraries of the world, some are really well known to history, like the Library of Alexandria or the House of Wisdom from Baghdad, or even the Vatican libraries. However, there is a much older library than these, no less significant, whose discovery flipped human history on its head, and whose insights pierced through the fog of millennia into the very heart of the human condition. So what am I talking about? The Library of Ashurbanipal, the greatest of the Neo-Assyrian emperors, dug up by Iraqi and British archaeologists in the middle of the 19th century in the city of Mosul. Tens of thousands of clay tablets have been discovered there, dense with strange symbols which look like the footprints of a pigeon who had been walking through wet cement. While the library itself dates from the 7th century BC, which is still formidably old, some of the texts in its corpus have even older origins than that, and harken all the way back to 2900 BC when people speaking Sumerian began building more and more cities in Mesopotamia out of the clay from the riverbanks of the two great rivers there, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This was the same period where Britons were hauling huge stones from Wales and Scotland down to the Salisbury Plain. This was the same period where the very first pharaohs were coalescing their power in Egypt, and where woolly mammoths still roamed on Wrangel Island off the coast of Siberia, and dwarf elephants suntanned on the beaches of the Greek island of Telos. The vast library of Ashurbanipal contained many different types of texts. Some were on the position of the planet Venus in relation to the sun. Others were about the conquests of various Babylonian and Assyrian kings, while still yet there were stories and myths which would shatter our understanding of the Bible. The most famous of these, the Epic of Gilgamesh, contained within it a flood story eerily similar to that of the Old Testament, although the earliest fragments of the Epic of Gilgamesh date from around 1,000 years before Genesis was written. Today, I have promised you texts which get to the very heart of the human condition. But what does that mean? How can the lives and works of people from thousands of years ago who lived in radically different societies have much in common with us, modern people? The answer lies in their proverbs. Proverbs are often the pithiest and most universal types of wisdom we have. They often transcend cultures. The English proverb, "A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush," can be found in different cultures all over the world. There is so much similarity in proverbs and folk wisdom around the world because, fundamentally, we are the same animals. We have the same biologies, we live in roughly similar environments, and we face the same psychological challenges and pitfalls. It just absolutely blows my mind to have that fact affirmed by sayings from one of the oldest and strangest cultures in the world, at least that we have access to. And the civilizations of Mesopotamia were radically different. Just in case there's any doubt in your mind, these weren't modern, liberal-minded chaps who just happened to have luxuriantly curled beards. They weren't hipsters on ziggurats. Ashurbanipal, while clearly a prodigious benefactor of the arts, was also a terrifying conqueror. He destroyed the cities of Elam, levelling them brick by brick, and having salt sown into the soil so nothing could grow there ever again. He had the Elamite chiefs skinned alive and had their tongues ripped out. One of the most chilling and darkly fabulous pieces of propaganda I have ever seen comes from Ashurbanipal's palace at Nineveh. The king reclines in his garden as his servants fan him, bringing him exquisite platters of different foods. Ashurbanipal drinks a saucer of wine, holding the plate up to his lips. However, blink and you'll miss it. The severed head of the king of Elam, presumably rotting, is hanging from one of the glistening green trees of his garden. And it isn't just their brutality we might find shocking, their religion and cosmology was completely different. I mean, they believed in a whole wide array of weird and wonderful and capricious and warring deities. Perhaps strangest of all is that they believed death didn't bring you to a paradise, but to a shadowy underworld called Kur by the Sumerians, or Setu by the Akkadian-speaking Babylonians and Assyrians. This immense and desolate cavern was filled with wandering spirits, some of them naked, sometimes covered with feathers, and only the lucky few whose family kept making offerings to their grave could actually eat and drink in this bleak underworld. Everyone else just drifted listlessly about in the dark, eating only dust, yearning for something that could quench their insatiable thirst. Those who had been improperly buried or who had died by fire were simply annihilated and wouldn't make it to the underworld at all, which, to be honest, sounds like arguably a better deal. But now, as long as you believe me that Mesopotamians were in fact very different to us, let's explore some of their proverbs. I will admit that I have been selective. Many of the proverbs which survive are obscure, and their meaning has been more or less fully lost in translation. If you can relate to something like this, the N priest eats fish and leeks, but Cress makes him ill, then good on you, but to me, you know, I don't have a clue. That's gibberish. Let's get into the good ones now, and do let me know if you're enjoying this video by liking and subscribing to the channel, and definitely commenting what your favourite proverb is. I'd love to get a discussion going down in the comment section. The smith's dog could not overturn the anvil. He therefore overturned the waterpot instead. This proverb is beautiful. It's a classic example of picking on someone smaller than you or settling for the manageable task. You're angry, let's say, you're chafing for a boxing match and you want to go and find someone out in the town. When you see the roided up man mountain coming out of the gym, you don't go and fight him, or if you do, you realise very quickly it was a bad mistake because you're pummeled into the dust. No, you being an average size bully, you look for someone your own size or even smaller. The shrimpy guy, the nerdy guy, the specky guy. You always look for the task beneath you, for the creature lower down on the food chain. While that isn't a good thing, this proverb is not a morality play. For better or for worse, this is surely just true. Upon escaping from the wild ox, the wild cow confronted me. This is a superb one. Again, really modern. It's exactly the same proverb as out of the frying pan and into the fire. You think you've escaped something dangerous, but you've just walked in to more danger. I wonder, what do you think is the point of a proverb like this? Is it to always be on guard, to stay on your toes? I think that's definitely part of it, but it almost runs deeper than that. I think part of this proverb is saying, you know, don't take anything for granted. Don't take your life for granted, especially, because danger is everywhere, and of course, your life is precious. Your life is an evanescent jewel. In the words of my favourite Japanese death poem, it lights up as lightly as it fades. A firefly. I'd love to know what your favourite Japanese death poem is. Leave your answers in the comments below. You don't speak of that which you have found, you speak only of what you have lost. This is about taking things for granted. Yes, I mean, this is such a huge problem. This is such an obstacle to people's happiness. Now look, I live a happy and comfortable life. I appreciate that. You know, and not everyone is in the same position as I am. Being a Brit, I was wet-nursed by the Queen from a very young age, as all British children, or we call them grubs or nurslings, are. I'm therefore a pretty privileged person. But listen, I think it's true to say that if you can find one thing, just one thing to be grateful about, and focus in on that, it can really change your life. It can really improve your entire conception of the world. I mean, even if it's something as simple as the comfiness of a pillow or the glow of an autumn leaf, it's still worth feeling grateful about it. There's so much beauty and mystery in the world waiting for you to discover it, and I hope you do. The stuff that you lose is already gone. What about the stuff right in front of your eyes? No one walks for a second time at the place where a lion has eaten a man. Again, this is just true. I mean, if I was walking along a street in London, let's say Baker Street, and someone came up to me and said, "Oh man, guess what? A guy just got eaten by a lion there," I would probably change directions and find a different street to walk down. In fact, I'd probably have quite a few questions. Two caveats to this one though. Is it always wise to have this perspective? You know, perhaps if I'd checked the news, I would have seen that the lion had already been captured by the authorities and therefore was no longer at large on Baker Street. Would it make sense, therefore, for me to avoid Baker Street for the rest of my life? I would say not. Correlation does not equal causation after all, and just because 100% of the lion attacks in London happened on Baker Street doesn't actually mean that Baker Street itself is the problem. And also, while the example of the lion in the proverb makes the danger of the situation inarguably real, I think this kind of logic can get a bit twisted when we start applying it to other human beings. A poverty-stricken community might produce more crime, and therefore, by the logic of the proverb, you might be justified in starting to avoid people from that community and start treating them, stigmatizing them, as human lions. However, the potential result of such an approach to your fellow animal is segregation, alienation, discrimination. While of course I'm not saying you should go and seek out the most dangerous neighborhood in your city and start offering free hugs, I am saying that just because someone is from the same neighborhood as a lion attack doesn't actually make them a lion themselves. They might be a bunny, in which case it's inappropriate to treat them as a carnivore. A dog said to his master, "If my pleasure is of no importance to you, then my loss should not be either." In my view, this is a great lesson about the reciprocity needed to form and maintain healthy relationships. If you don't care about the well-being of someone else, if you don't value their pleasure intrinsically, then you can't complain when they leave. You don't get to object to the loss of someone whose needs you didn't take seriously. And many of us figure this out the hard way, and it's something that those wise old wily Mesopotamians knew as well. Tell a lie and then tell the truth. It will be heard as a lie. This, of course, is a variant on one of Aesop's fables, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Now, it's a very well-known story, but on the off chance that some of you haven't heard of it, it's about a boy who is bored and restless whilst looking after a flock of sheep, and so begins to shout out, "Wolf, wolf, wolf," and makes up a story that basically he fended off a wolf which tried to attack the flock. The villagers who came running to the boy's calls are at first impressed, but when the boy repeats the trick again and again and again, the villagers begin to realise that the kid's just an attention seeker. However, one bleak and dark evening, as the boy maintains his usual lackluster vigil over his flock, he spies the poisonous yellow eyes of a wolf peering at him from out of the shadows. "Wolf!" he cries. "Wolf!" But none of the villagers come. They've wised up to his trick. The sheep are all killed, one, by the wolf, leaving the boy distraught, defenseless, and destitute. And I hope this story is sufficient commentary on that proverb. Fate is a dog walking always behind a man. This is one I relate to those of you who are watching but haven't yet subscribed to the channel. You may avoid subscribing now, you may avoid commenting and liking, you may avoid giving me money on Patreon. I get it, alright? I get it. I was once like you, lurking in the shadows. But remember, fate is a dog always walking behind a man. And your fate is to join this community and be my friend. A dog which is played with turns into a puppy. The Mesopotamians really loved a dog proverb, didn't they? I mean, perhaps that's a way they were also similar to us. They valued dogs as companions, as hunters, as well as, occasionally, as food. But this proverb here provides me a perfectly optimistic note on which to end this video. Perhaps turning a dog into a puppy would be seen as a negative to a Mesopotamian audience. Perhaps this is a lesson against coddling people. If you treat an adult like a child, they'll behave like a child in a negative way. But there is a positive spin on this, which I personally prefer. Playing with someone, being kind and fun with people, can bring out their inner child, their sweetness and earnestness and sense of wonder about the world. Those traits are, I think, at the very core of a good life. And if more of us human dogs behaved like puppies, I think the world would be a better place. The eminent Assyriologist Samuel Noah Kramer had this to say about proverbs. One of the significant characteristics of proverbs in general is the universal relevance of their content. If you ever begin to doubt the brotherhood of man and the common humanity of all peoples and races, turn to their sayings and maxims, their precepts and adages. More than any other literary products, they pierce the crust of cultural contrasts and environmental differences, and lay bare the fundamental nature of all men, no matter where and when they live. I think this is exactly right. We live in a strange and sometimes frightening world. Other people can seem strange and frightening and off-putting. We tend to pigeonhole others, whether that's by culture or creed or even personality. He's woke, she's prejudiced, he's Muslim, she's sensitive. This helps us navigate the world more expediently, but using labels to dismiss others can stifle the inquiring mind. It can kill the curiosity which is at the heart of friendship and brotherhood between nations, between cultures, and between individuals. The fact we can leaf through the antique contents of a library of an Assyrian conqueror who ruled over the Near East over 2,500 years ago and find in it words of wisdom to live by in the modern world is nothing short of astounding to me. Few profounder statements of our universal humanity exist, but those which do, I will seek to find and share them with you on this channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.